for webcasting, that's a reminder that the meeting is being webcast. Those in attendance that should refrain from making any defamatory remarks. Thank you. Councillor Reid is just kindly showing the door because it's a little noisy outside. So on that note, could we all be upstanding for the acknowledgement to country and the prayer? Councillor Reid, thank you. So I acknowledge that we're meeting on the ancestral lands of the Ngunnawal people. I recognise the Ngunnawal as the traditional custodians and pay respects to the elders of the community and their descendants. We move to the prayer. Let us all be still and remember the presence of God. As we commence our meeting, let us together pray for guidance and help. Almighty God, we ask your blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper our diversions, true will for Australia and the people of Yass. People of Yass Valley. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Okay, our second item is apologies. I appreciate we don't have any apologies, but am conscious and respectful that two of our councillors have personal considerations, so have joined us via Zoom. As you mentioned, Mayor Abby, it can be a little hard to see Zoom. So, Cherie, would you mind just keeping an eye if they do have a question and I don't pick it up, please? Thank you very much. So please wave away. Declarations of pecuniary interest and special disclosures. I believe we have a few, so might go around the room. Councillor Burgess.
Well, I was on 6.4. Being paid with Kaima Gundaroo that I've been every time it comes to meetings.
Will you stay in the room?
No.
No. Okay. Councillor Reid, all good? Councillor Frost? Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you, Chair Harper. I need to declare an interest at this point in time, unless we separate them out, in 6.1, number 20, 6.22, Yass Soldiers Club, and 9.4, leasing of council property. The reasons being for these are the business that I own and operate is in advertising negotiations with an entity that owns the land, and also with the property consultant used for the process for the fourth property.
And will you be leaving?
I'll be leaving. Significant pecuniary and leaving.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Turner? No? Councillor McManus?
Yes, actually, Madam Mayor, 6.1, weighted on land sales, and 6.2 for the same reason. I'm Vice President of the Soldiers Club and a life member of that club. If with the agreement of the meeting, if we could take out any of the items of 6.1, that would allow me to participate in the rest of the meeting. So if we could, if it was possible to split that report, Mr. General Manager.
It's certainly possible. We can do that. It just needs a mover and a seconder to do that, and we can separate it out.
I'll declare an interest in 6.1, and then if it is separated out, I'll leave it in for the 6.1A, so I can participate in 6.1B. That's okay.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm happy to either move or second that motion that's just been raised.
Sure, we might move that just after we finish off the declarations, but do you actually have a declaration?
No, Madam Chair, thank you.
And Mayor Abby?
Yes, I have a declaration in relation to 9.2 and 9.4, which relates to confidential matters 13.1 and 13.4. In relation to 9.2 and 13.1, I have a close association with the person who this is being discussed about. So well, it's not pecuniary, but it is significant. So I shall leave the meeting. And in relation to 9.4, I have a significant and pecuniary and will leave the meeting for that as well.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Abby. Councillor Reid, did you?
Just seconding the motion.
Okay. I also have a disclosure. It is non-pecuniary, non-significant on item 9.2. I'm a distant relative of the applicant, so I don't feel conflicted, but for disclosure, I wanted to include it.
And Chair, I'm declaring interest in the items relating to the General Manager's performance review.
Okay.
For obvious reasons.
Okay, so we will, there's no mayoral, we need to do confirmation of minutes first. Does anyone have any amendments or adjustments to the minutes from the previous meeting? No? Is someone happy to move and second the minutes, please? Councillor Reid, Councillor Turner, is that a hand? Thank you. Okay, item 5, we don't have a mayoral minute to my understanding.
Point of order, Chair. I think the Mayor might have a mayoral minute if she could just pause a moment and think back to a certain shovel moment.
A verbal shovel, a verbal mayoral report.
Good thought, Councillor Jones.
Well done. Thank you. It all happened before we got the papers out. Obviously, we were unable to tell anyone too much before. Councillors were briefly advised of it just before the actual commencement of the duplication of the Barton Highway, which has officially been commenced with a turning of dirt on Monday morning, which was a very exciting thing. They could barely hear anything through the trucks roaring past, which is to be expected. They're expecting to go to Caveney's Road, although the RMS, or now Transport for New South Wales, didn't think that they would get as far as that, but the consortium has believed that they can get at least that far, which is what we were hoping to hear from them. And we started lobbying Senator Molan and the member for Goulburn, Wendy Tuckerman, just after we turned the first sod for the commencement and additional money to continue the Barton Highway project. So an exciting day that I think many of us wondered would ever get here.
Yes, good week this week.
Good week.
Thank you, Mayor Abbey, and very good suggestion, Councillor Jones.
My pleasure.
Yes, it'd be remiss to go without discussing that. Okay, and anything else to add, Mayor Abbey?
No, that was the main issue, and I think the other items were done as press releases into additional grants for both Murrum Bateman and project in the Pony Club area or the horse area and the bike ride. Congratulations to actually the team at council and the people who are supporting that. They've actually been getting a continuous amount of grants. I'm not sure how you're going to deliver them all, but I have full faith that it will happen.
Okay, thank you. So next we'll move on to item 6, Director of Planning and Environment report. So if we follow the normal procedure. Sorry?
Madam Chairman, I think you need the motion, don't you?
Yes, so we can do that first. We can go through them all, or we can go through that one. We'll go through item 6.1 first to reorganise them. That's a good suggestion. Otherwise we have people leaving the room.
Yes. Through you, Madam Chair, if we could arrange that, so I'll put a formal motion, that items 8 and
Councillor Jones, there's a motion up on the screen.
Oh,
that
excellent.
reflects that.
alternative, that consideration of Chinaman's Creek car park Yass be dealt with separately to all the other properties listed in the report. Thank you.
Seconded.
Okay, so with that, is everyone like to vote on that alternative motion, or does anyone like to speak to the alternative motion? Are we happy to vote on the alternative motion?
Yes.
All those in favour? Okay.
Aye.
So that means that I think
Everything but this.
yes,
If we can deal with everything but that one, so we'll deal with
Yes.
that one after.
that will
Okay.
be
yeah.
separate. So it means that if you have a conflict, you don't have to leave for that for item 6.1.
Can I actually take my name off voting together for that?
For the alternative motion. He doesn't want to vote as
But you can do as an abstain.
Abstain, which is a negative,
Which
is
is a negative.
It is what it is.
because it's what I want.
You're only voting. You're only voting to not discuss it though.
That's all right.
All right.
Councillor
For
Green?
clarity, Madam Chair, I don't think this is an alternative motion. I don't think we've got a motion in the first place.
Just a
I
motion.
think
to
it just
separate.
is the motion.
It's a procedural motion to separate out the two.
Call it a procedural motion to separate out this item from the other items in 6.1. Does that mean we need to have it as like
So now we can list it,
6.1B?
yeah.
Because it still needs to be dealt with that particular item.
So if we call this one 6.1B, that will actually look right because we've declared interest for 6.1.
And we can then deal with that separately and have you leave the room for that discussion. Is that possible? We have item
Yeah.
6.1A, 6.1B. That's fine. Okay, so on that note, we might deal with each of these individually because I think there's quite a few declarations on each of these items in 6.1. So if you're happy to do that, we'll do them one at a time to allow everyone's disclosures to be dealt with.
Okay, so I haven't done that. I've separated out just one.
Yeah, so now we'll go to,
There's no one declared any other than Councillor McManus.
Yeah.
In any of the properties that
No.
are listed in what is now 6.1B.
Yes.
So we need to do
So
that.
the motion, if you like, or if you like the alternate motion now to reflect what was just decided on splitting it, is that item 1 would be the recommendation in the following table of properties 1 to 24, excluding property 8, be endorsed. There has been some slight changes to that to clarify some questions that Councillor Frost had, so they're all highlighted in red to make it just crystal clear exactly which items will be reported back to council in the future, as distinct from things that will be proceeded as an operational exercise. And then the part 2, if you like, of the motion is exactly what was printed in the published report, which talks about the open space strategy being a project in the next financial year, will be included in the operational plan for next financial year.
If I could move the recommendation for 6.1B to include the all of the table bar the one that we've eliminated already. Point 2, which is the preparation of the open strategy, and also an additional comment for item 7, which is the 9 to 13 Dutton Street. That's land which is zoned medium density residential. Currently, as obtaining quote for contaminated land, include funding for assessment in the forthcoming budget, etc. I've also included a point which says that a future report be presented to council to consider disposal following completion of the heritage and contamination assessments, the transfer of land at the rear of the site, and the completion of the housing strategy. Yeah, that's item 7. And then, depending on the above outcome, the assessments for disposal would follow. So, speaking to the motion, if I need to.
You happy to move the motion, and we need a seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Turner, thank you very much.
Thank you. Fellow councillors, we have staff working very hard on a thing called our housing strategy. We had an affordable housing forum in which members of the commercial and private sector, members of community groups and not-for-profits all came here and talked about one really critical issue, and that is the desperate need for affordable housing in Yass. We have staff working on a strategy that will hopefully guide future councils to identify where and how council can help. I'd like to go 3,000 steps forward and commit us to some kind of affordable housing partnership But I think we need to let the strategy actually be utilised as a tool and allow that to run its course and then come back to us, because I imagine that this strategy will help us analyse not just this one section of Yass, but also areas around our CBD that make sense to have affordable housing where there's close to schools, infrastructure, health, etc., etc. So I commend this addition or amendment to the motion to assist us in the future look after some of our most vulnerable.
Did anyone else want to speak to this item? Sheree, could you bring the recommendation back up when you have a minute, please? Like the actual recommendation at the top. Councillor Frost.
The recommendations within each item they become part of the overall recommendation that we're part of. So then they become part of the motion. That's how we presented it to make it absolutely crystal clear, because there's been some changes, if you like, from what's published in the report, and of course it just helps provide a link, if you like, to exactly what council's decided to do. Because I think one of the things which is we thought about that actually said go off and sell that reference to council. Didn't mean to say that. That's what I did say. So, but anyway, that's my point. I think that's going to be so.
My concern is that we've got five fibres that we dispose of now. And given we're going to go through the effort of organising that boundary adjustment to 5 rather than 7, are we better off leaving 5 to be considered in conjunction with 7? It certainly make the area more attractive to a buyer.
My recollection was that number 5 is effectively just the Goodwood Centre, and the other item relates to all of that land behind the Goodwood Centre going back towards the old gasworks. The area behind that land in Dutton Street, it's not no man's land. We've put in a request to the lands department to have that transferred into council's name. It's an anomaly between the gazetting of the town and the usual site. So it's just an accident of history. And we put in a claim to have that put into council's name, so that we can then amalgamate it, if you like, with the land that we own in Dutton Street. So Goodwood Digby Centre itself can be dealt with separately to that land.
Right.
Do you want to bring up the image? Do you want to see it on the
Wouldn't
screen?
it be more attractive?
I think when we had the workshop, we talked about interest in the shed, that part of the Goodwood Digby Centre site, the front of the bits that are joining there, and there was some interest in that one. And the idea was that, yes, if there was somebody interested in using that particular facility, now we can actually lease it or license it or dispose of it.
The recommendation is to dispose of it. I don't know whether we want to necessarily dispose of it. If we need to do the remediation.
Well, we still have to do all of those bits and pieces, yes.
But the recommendation was to dispose of. I'm saying let's not jump to disposal.
Do you want to amend that one to bring back to council for further consideration?
Councillor Jones, Councillor Jones.
I think that's far more healthy. That's far more healthy, given we actually don't know how much it's going to cost to remediate. And maybe the only option is up to remediate is to sell it to get back the money we're going to spend. But at the same time, I don't want to jump to that conclusion at this stage in the process.
So would you like to recommend an alternative?
The general managers are correct that it may be the alternative to very, very good leases available to us, not necessarily disposing of. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think of the recommendation there that a further report be presented to it.
Is that
Once remediation is done.
Yeah, following the completion of any remediation.
So there's no recommendation,
Options
remediation.
Options report.
yeah? So there may be an opportunity to split it in two. We may want to keep one half, but I just don't want to dispose of it once it's done because with some of those other ones, I'm quite happy to let them go.
A further report be presented to council.
Once that's up to the mover and seconder, please let me know if you're agreeable to that change.
No.
I will just give Cherie a minute to just record.
Future report.
And while Cherie's just bringing that up,
Present to council
so the mover and seconder have agreed that they're happy with that amendment.
following.
While she's bringing it up, is there anyone else who wanted to speak to Councillor Ferrer, Councillor Abbey? Anyone else want to speak to this particular item?
No,
All
I'm
good,
happy
thank you,
with the
Madam Chair.
changes.
Okay. Is that up there now? Would you like to not have speak to close the happy for the okay? We're happy to vote on the recommendation, please. All those in favour?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Can't see Councillor Abbey, but thank you for speaking.
Aye.
Now procedurally, I noticed. Thank you. So that is passed. I noticed we called the second one item 6(1)A versus 1B, but is that procedurally does it matter which one's A and B? We dealt with A first, it must logically be B.
Well, I think you had the splitting was A, this one was B, so the next one will be C.
Well, this is B, isn't it? So that was 6(1)A, and this is 6(1)B.
6(1)A was the motion to split.
Oh, okay, so that's 6(1)B, so it's
6(1)B,
C.
if you want to just dealt
Thank
with, this will be 6.
Okay, so make sure we get that correctly. So thank you, Councillor McNair, Councillor Jones. Okay, so this separates out the item number 8, the time car park, as a separate item. Would someone like to move the motion? Councillor Frost? Would anyone like to second the motion?
Second.
Councillor Reid, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would again, I'd thank the general manager for clarifying this, because I think it's one that needs clarifying, and one that's going to there's going to be a lot of interest in it. The great institutions of town are going to be involved in this, and I think it's really important to carefully, slowly, and very much out in the open. I know we would anyway, but I think there's some extra care. I think what's being done here is just that. I think we can come up with a really good result of this. I think we really do need to look and consider, not just what the plan, but that we need to consider traffic around that side of probably the whole CBD and where it might flow. And the thought of having slow moving traffic from one route to routes in there and without necessarily to clutter more into I think the process is now designed so that those steps can be, the public can be taken through those steps to understand what's proposed and express an opinion on it. Bring it back to the MOU top in this place and decision made.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Did anyone else want to speak to this particular item 6(1)C? Cherie's put the recommendation up there. The amendment is in red. So if no one else would like to speak, let's vote on the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That's unanimous. Aye, with 2 abstains. Okay, we can bring the next one. Yes, they are both out. Back to my sheet. Okay, so we move on to item 6.2, the Yass Soldiers Club.
Chair, I think you probably now need to adjust the the motion here to reflect what you've just determined. So posted that up on the screen for you, so that the request to purchase the land be deferred pending the preparation of the traffic plan to enable continuous vehicle and pedestrian access from there and through to Lead Street. A future report be presented to council to consider the disposal following the completion of that assessment. So it's just simply reflecting what you've already determined in the previous report.
So moved.
Okay, so we have a mover
Seconded.
and Deputy Mayor Ferry, thank you. Did anyone like to speak for or against the motion? No? We have,
I think it's been covered by Councillor Frost in the earlier conversation.
yes, thank you, Councillor Frost. Let's put it to a vote for the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Now we can bring back, everyone is in the room for item 6.3. So item 6.3, planning proposal Coolwyn, 208 Sibley Road, Gundaroo.
I move it be noted.
Thank you, Mayor Abbey. Councillor Reid, be noted. Anyone like to speak for or against the motion? No. Let's vote on the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That's unanimous. Motion has passed. Now for item 6.4, Councillor Burgess is going to leave the room. Thank you. So the planning proposal, Chimera Gundaroo. The recommendation is up. We have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, please.
I'm happy to so move it.
Mayor Abbey, Councillor McManus. Would anyone like to speak to any of the two recommendations on there?
Can I just ask the obvious question? Why do we need to do this? What went wrong in the system that we ended up with all this?
So the development application was submitted to council and it appears that there was an error that occurred during the survey for the development application and then how that information was represented in the development application and it wasn't picked up in the assessment of the actual application. So then the error came to light, I think, the updating of the mapping base on our mapping system and possibly through the application for a planning certificate for a sale of the property.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, this item? Okay, let's move the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Councillor Jones? Yes. Aye. Okay. Thank you. That's unanimous. We mind bringing Councillor Burgess back?
Just grabbing my water.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 6.5, the development consent for subdivision Isabella Drive, Tomorrow Embankment.
Chair, just to remind councillors that we do have a submission that wasn't included in the papers that have been circulated. It doesn't raise any more issues, new issues, issues that were raised in the third submission actually have been dealt with through the report.
Okay, do we have a mover for this motion, please?
So moved.
And happy to second. Councillor Reid, second. Anyone like to speak for or against the motion? No, we're all good. Okay, let's move the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, moving, this following item's been withdrawn is my understanding, item 6.6. Is that correct?
That's correct. Simply, I think you just note the withdrawal. There was a information up there on the application. The withdrawal of the development application from construction of internal road access to doing that.
So we need to thank you, Councillor Turner. And the seconder, Councillor Reid. Did you have a question, Councillor McManus?
Subject to a resubmit.
Well,
Fully from council.
They've withdrawn fully from council at this stage. They've indicated in their withdrawal that obviously their other business interests are struggling at the moment, and they've obviously had a review of all of their business activities, and they've just simply withdrawn this at this particular point in time. That's not to say it won't come back in the future. It may do, because this particular approval was reliant upon work being done at the Canberra airport. If that airport work has been put on hold, there's no source of material for this to go ahead. So if they come back in 5 years' time, this would have been lapsed anyway. So I think they've just made a strategic decision to withdraw this, and when business, I guess, picks up.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this item? Happy to put forward the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
All right, thank you. That is unanimous. Motion is moved. Note the withdrawal. Item 6.7, the 2021 community grants. Thank you. Councillor Turner and Councillor Frost.
May I
Councillor
recommend
Jones?
an amendment? And first of all, I want to thank the workers, staff and councillors involved, Councillors Turner and Frost, in the assessment of this. Could I, noting that we have approximately 20,000 left in the kitty, and that there are many projects out there needing some seed funding or boost, that we include a third point that a second round of community grants be organised in the first half of 2021.
I think that's already there.
Application for a second round of community grants being filed. That's good. Yes. Just right. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor McManus.
I thought Councillor Jones was going to actually remove one. I was really excited. So I'll be moving an amendment we actually delete two, and that be added to the budget for following year. So we actually have a significantly larger grant fund for the incoming council, which in September.
Does that have any budget?
Instead of calling for them now for just $20,000 and having 6 groups fighting over 20,000, we actually say, look, we'll add it to the next year's amount, which will allow us to have a bigger amount for the new council coming in. My alternative, or my amendment, is to actually delete 2.
You can do that. It simply means the mechanism for doing that will be put through the budget revote process.
Yeah.
And then it would be certainly added to the proposed budget that we'll be preparing next year. Yeah. So that's if you wanted to do that.
So remind me procedurally how we deal with that.
I think you deal with the amendment. So
Do we have we need a seconder for the amendment?
that's right.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a seconded amendment. Do you want to speak further to the amendment? Is that
Just, I think we've all looked at our budget. The budget is tight. This is an opportunity for us to not spend, carry over that money to next year. We talked before the meeting about the whole running deficit budgets. And I know $20,000 isn't a lot, and we'll spend it next year. But given we've gone out to a significant number of diverse groups, Bounding, Byron, Longmorrow, Bateman, Sutton, the only place that didn't get $1 was Bookham and Gundaroo. I just think this is an opportunity for us to set aside the $20,000, put it into next year's amount, make that bucket bigger and healthier, so that the incoming council will then be able to initiate some of the things that they'll be bringing forward when it comes to the next election. We don't need to spend it for the next 6 months.
Did anyone else want to speak for or against the amendment? Councillor Jones and Councillor Frost.
I'd just like to speak against the amendment. With $20,000, we could have pulled off 9 out of the 11 projects. So it's not like we need a big chunk of money to dig a hole for a pool. This is 9 out of 11 of these projects would have got legs. So, I mean, there's 2 big ones in there for 4,000 each. So 20,000 does stretch. And let's get that economy out there stimulated. Let's get these community groups feeling good about getting another project ticked off. And I think if we've got the money in our hands, we should get it out there into the community, because that's what it is. It's community grants. Councillor Frost.
Just support that very much, and I remind councillors that we've gone through still involved in COVID situation, and many of the community groups simply haven't been meeting. They haven't been meeting because they haven't been able to, because the COVID rules have made it very, very difficult, as we all know. And so the list that we received reflected a diminished community. We have a chance to make that up, because thankfully it looks like we're getting a bit more freedom in what we can do, and groups are starting to meet more than they used to be. I think it would be to transfer it next year doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's community money that needs to be spent on the community, and you're still going to spend it anyway. So you're going to delay everything for whatever number. If you have your round in early 2021, and it doesn't go anyway, and there's not more applications, well, maybe then you carry it over for until very early 21-22. But to my mind, there's no need to deprive the community of these funds just because they haven't been able to apply for it within our time frame.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor, can I maybe make a suggestion that might cover both of those options, that you go for the additional community grants in early 21. If they are not taken up, they then get deferred. So we don't actually have to have the continued discussion. If they're not taken up in this early 2021 round of grant applications, it then automatically follows through to the following year to make that pot larger for the next round of grant applications.
Yeah.
That's a good accommodation. Do we have to deal with that in the?
It's really whether you're prepared to put that into the amendment, Councillor McManus, or not.
Councillor McManus?
Yeah, I just thinking, just after 2021, any surplus money be added to next year's budget.
Do we have to, because that's actually in the motion, not in the amendment now, so we'll have to deal with the.
If the mover and the seconder are happy with that adjustment, then it can be incorporated into the motion.
Okay.
I didn't want the money to lapse, that's all, because that's what can happen with budgets.
Are the mover and seconder happy?
I commend Madam Solomon for good explanation and support it happily.
Okay, so we're fine to have let the amendment now disappears and the motion becomes the original motion with that. Okay, anyone like to speak for or against the motion that's in front of us?
Oh, good.
Okay, we're happy to vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Councillor Jones? Yep. Okay, unanimous. Right, thank you, everyone. Resolutions. Okay, so now we'll move on to item 7, Director of Infrastructure and Asset Report. So I'll just go through these one by one because there's only 2 and I think people might want to speak to them. So item 7.1, the Cloth Nappy Rebank. Would someone like to move the motion?
I'll move the motion.
Councillor Mayor Abbey and Councillor Jones, would you like to second that motion?
Yes.
Would anyone like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Jones, I assumed you would.
I'd just like to commend the suggestion that's come through council. It's great to see that the community are thinking of ways to reduce waste, and having had 5 children, I can attest to the amount of waste that this generates. While I would like to see this introduced earlier, there is sense in bringing this back at a time when we can adjust our fees and charges to reflect any rebates.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Does anyone else want to speak for Or against this motion, councillor
I just
Reid?
wanted to make a comment. I think the figures here have been vastly underestimated. We're only talking about nappies for 0 to 4 years old, but there are people in a much older age group that will be also using them. So it could be double that amount of wastage.
Thank you, councillor Reid.
Got a question.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. Look, speaking against, I'm seeking clarity through yourself, Madam Chair, potentially to the Director of Infrastructure and Assets, regarding the average waste that's produced by the Yass Valley on a yearly basis. I've attempted to do a very quick Google search, and the figures that are coming up, and I think they're back in 2009, 2010. Put it at somewhere about 6,000 tonnes for the whole year. So I'm just trying to understand what that figure looks like to allow me to think about this a bit more.
I think we'll have to take that on notice, Councillor Ferry. I'm not sure what the current figure is, but certainly if we use that old figure, 6,000 tonnes per year for the whole community. Obviously, this is not a significant amount of that amount, but it is a reduction nevertheless if it can be diverted out of the landfill system. So I guess it's one of those options whereby it could help in a small way, and it's all those small ways that help reduce the overall amount of waste that has to go to landfill.
Are you happy to take that on notice, councillor Ferry?
Yeah, look, happy to take that on notice, Madam Chair, and if I can just speak against the motion. Madam Chair, look, I certainly appreciate the sincerity and the good intentions of this this consideration of the scheme. However, I feel like this alone is targeting a 6% figure, as it says in the report, 6% of the population. I think there's a lot of other schemes we should consider, particularly noting, for example, that one thing while Mayor Abbey and I were attending the Local Government New South Wales conference earlier in the week was waste to energy, which is an interesting concept. One, for example, that could be explored. Another one is whether or not council, which I think Councillor Jones herself has actually provided before, is water saving measures. So around the potential of putting rebates on water saving devices. Another one is actually looking at our bins around our streetscapes and similar to, across the border, having a recycling and a waste compartment within our bins. So I think on this alone, I feel it wouldn't be doing justice to the other 94% and all those opportunities there.
Okay, thank you, councillor Ferry. Councillor McManus, did you have a?
I was just mainly
next?
the mechanism of how we actually run a scheme.
Through you,
In a rural
Madam Chair.
area.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. The certainly in a number of councils in Victoria and some in southern New South Wales and Queensland, basically establish a rebate fund. People make claims against that fund and demonstrate that they've taken up a cloth nappy service or something along those lines. And once the fund is exhausted, it's exhausted. So it's like a first come, best dressed. That's the way those systems have operated. And certainly we could, if we were to proceed with this, we would look at what those other organisations have done and look at adopting or adapting their approach to administering a scheme here. So obviously there's a long way to go at this stage. The report is simply saying that we don't have any funds at the present time. If we're going to establish it through the budgetary process, and then we come back and say, well, this is how the scheme could work. There are plenty of rebate schemes that councils offer. I know certainly in my time at Armidale, they used to run a rebate scheme on installing more efficient wood heaters. And that was a way of dealing with their wood smoke problem. So Yeah, and we've done tanks in the past as well. So it's about establishing a fund and then working out the mechanisms, and we would learn from what other people have done and adapt it to our circumstances.
Thank you.
The reason I ask is I think most of these rebates work on actually having the formal service. So it isn't someone cloth nappy washing at home, it's actually signing up to either Logan City or Brisbane City rebate scheme, which actually signs you up to a provider, external provider, to wash and clean the nappies. So the only way this will work is if we actually end up with a typical service, either in Yass or Murray Bateman, that people can access. That's the problem with the scheme. I just wondered if we should actually be declaring the amount that we've been putting in the budget at this point.
No.
Because you need it. This is all signal based to get a service provider to come forward to do it. But otherwise, if you just say we're going to consider it, that provider won't come forward to establish the scheme.
The rebate schemes that I've seen, I think at Albury was about 150,000 per annum. It was at that magnitude. Again, looking at the scale of Albury versus Yass, there is certainly a bigger population, a bigger catchment in that area.
But we could consider $20,000
Potentially.
Councillor Turner.
in the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to just take issue with Councillor Furry there, quoting the 6%. As has been pointed out by Councillor Reid, there are a significant number who are not counted in there, and they're the seniors of this burg who are in the same position of using disposable nappies. Fringe benefit of this is, and having worked with cloth nappies, it's very simple to flush it down the loo, and everything that goes down the loo is degradable. If someone flushes a disposable down the loo, the engineer has a huge problem. The half-life of disposable nappies is something horrendous. Anything we can do to cut down the amount of plastic that goes into the environment, for me, is a plus. And I support this motion enormously.
Thank you. Councillor McManus, were you pondering
The motion.
I feel like he had something more to say in that.
Well, just the rebate scheme is a single based scheme. You'll need to get a provider. And I just wondered if we should be including an amount of $20,000 in the motion.
It's up to the movers and seconders, really. Yeah.
Not neither.
Councillor Jones.
Through you, Madam Chair, in workshopping this, I think councillors have came to the conclusion that we needed to understand what the volume would be in terms of waste to really break that down. And as Councillor Reid has pointed out, this issue is actually wider than the 0 to 4 age group. And just as much as our families are in a position to be needing assistance to do the right thing by the environment, some of our most vulnerable at the other spectrum in terms of fixed income and options might also need assistance. As a community, we're being asked to do this. As women, there are options now for instead of period pads to have period underwears, so it just goes down the drain instead of creating waste. It costs more to do that, but as someone who can earn income, I have to say I'm not. I wouldn't be eligible for this scheme. I wouldn't want to put myself forward for it. But for particularly for young families where you can't have somebody working, it's just not possible for them to work, then this, I think, is an instance where it's pretty important, as is the other end of the spectrum too. To say that there needs to be a provider, I think, is disadvantaging those that want to do the work themselves because they can't afford the provider to actually wash those cloth nappies. My mum washed those cloth nappies, and when I was, age 0 to 3, and she didn't have a job, and she would have been outsourcing it. So I don't think it's appropriate to say that we need to have a provider to offer
Councillor Jones. If I may ask a question as well. So in the part of the budgetary process, would a budget figure not be allocated to this? So that at that stage we would understand what the financial implications of this potential system would be.
Yeah, through the budgetary process, we get the managers to prepare a proposal. So if the idea was to include a rebate scheme within the budget process, they would prepare an outline of how it would operate, and then allocate or nominate an amount for inclusion in the first year of the scheme. And more than likely will also add the scheme be evaluated as part of the first year of its introduction. So that's normally what we would do. That would be the supporting papers for the budgetary, the draft budget that we present to council. So it would be part of that package.
If I may close, Chris basically just took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry, before you close, there's a few more questions before closing. And if you're going to close the debate, we have one or two first. Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I'm amazed at this. I generally don't mind them going to the budget, so to be considered. Then we're saying putting money in. We don't know what sort of scheme it is. Is it supporting the nappies? Is it supporting the washing of the nappies? If it's supporting the washing of the nappies, which some councils think that makes sense to me, but if it is, then quite likely we don't have a supplier. If it's supporting the nappies, I would think you have to look at how efficient this is. Because you understand, for example, if the money you spend on nappies goes to people who buy cloth nappies anyway, then you're going to have to pay it to them as well as the ones that are going to change their mind. You can't pick those out. So therefore, you're going to spend a lot of your money making no change at all, and some of your money presumably making some change. We don't know how well that works, how efficient that is. To me, we fear that the poor engineer having to put up with disposable nappies down there, but we haven't had a complaint from the engineer saying, we're being run under. It's a part of the job that they're doing. It hasn't been told us. So, yeah, put it in the budget, but when it comes back, it needs to come back with some facts behind it, not just a sort of, it'll be a nice idea to help this group of people. It needs to have something, and I'm still getting my head around the idea that whether or not this is something for a local government really to be considering. If it impacts into the operational part, yeah, I can see how we might work that way. But if it's just because these poor people don't, they never care do it. Right? It's presumably as much in Yass Valley as it is in anywhere else. It can be done by the state government, done by the federal government. Presumably they have looked at some of the issues I just talked about and decided not to do it. So why would we go further? I don't do the research, but when it comes back from funding, we can have some facts about what's around there, because we need to spend our money well, as people are saying. And there are a lot of other things in this community that can be spent efficiently. I'm happy enough with the motion as it is, but as to putting more money with it, and as for implying that somehow this council anyway has actually been convinced that this is a good thing to do and something to burden the next council with as something that going forward, well, there's a long way to go before we.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Does anyone else have any commentary before Mayor Abbey closes the debate? I think Mayor Abbey.
Okay, I was just going to say, if you read the motion, it says, resolve that the introduction of a cloth nappy rebate scheme be considered as part of the budget process, which means all of the above conversations are about bringing us back more information before we decide for or against, as I read it. Thank you. Happy to put the motion.
Thank you. So we're ready to vote on the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Okay, item 7.2, our local roads and community infrastructure grant, extension of the program.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Ferry?
Happy to move that and we'll speak to it.
Okay, so It's currently, if you look at what's on there, the infrastructure.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor. Option 1. So where number 2 is listed, changing that to option 1 is what I'm moving as the recommendation, which would place the full funding towards road resealing. Resheeting. My apologies.
Do we have a seconder for the motion, which is the alteration of option 6 to option 1?
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you, Mayor Abbey. Did you want to speak to the motion, Councillor Ferry?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we're at war. We're at war with the current La Nina weather event, and the damage that it's doing to our roads infrastructure has only just begun. More and more unsealed roads are falling victim to this season of unprecedented rain. While it's unlikely to be as damaging as the 2011 La Nina weather event, it's still being acknowledged by the Bureau of Meteorology as being what will be a considerable and significant event. Many roads previously graded, as we saw earlier in the week and over the past month, being broken up, torn apart, lifted and shifted by significant rainwater into creek beds right across the valley. It's been argued that while these roads are rural, they're not widely travelled. They're not as actively travelled as their sealed counterparts. It's also been argued that many aren't very broadly or largely signposted. Their names are broadly unknown, and their daily movements may range in the double digits, if any. But in reality, it's these roads, while rural, that are the daily connection for many of our residents to what local government's actually delivering for them. It ensures that our children can find a way to safely get to school, ensures residents can safely navigate across villages, towns, within the LGA and beyond. Basically, when we grade our roads, we're protecting the lives of our residents, and that is more critical than anything. We're protecting their livelihoods, we're protecting their produce, their livestock. Our roads are at the veins of our community. There is nothing more important, in my opinion. And they do have names, and I'm sure many of councillors here at this meeting would have heard of those names: Crossleys, Back Creek, Talagandra, Dix Creek, Hardwick, Laverstock, Common, Black Range. There's so many more that we've had residents over the past few weeks ring, phone through, email, send complaints across that action needed to be taken. That's why I'm recommending, Madam Chair, that we put all of these funds into resheeting our roads. While it doesn't sound sexy, while it doesn't conjure a ribbon cutting, while it doesn't mean having colourful exercise equipment or new timber flooring, it saves lives. It ensures that our residents continue to get to and from their properties with some relative safety. Finally, and over the past 2 years, my understanding is that we reallocated funding that ordinarily assigned for grading works. And as you see, that's starting to come across as we wear more and more complaints about these roads, especially in this weather event. The only way that we're going to have a chance to catch up on this program is by taking this grant funding in its entirety and actually putting it into a war chest, actually ensuring that a meaningful effort's done here to reverse and remediate the damage that's already been done. I know some councillors have argued, well, how long is a piece of string? But the reality is every dollar that's not spent on resheeting our roads is a dollar lost, and a dollar to put to something, as you'll see in the business papers, that could easily be found through other grant programs. So I'd honestly, on behalf of the community, ask councillors to consider very carefully where they put these dollars going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Ferry. Did anyone else want to speak for or against? Councillor Frost and Councillor Jones.
I'd just like to ask a question, Madam Chair. The 3 weeks of the birthday, how much of what's the current, roughly the average cost of resheeting gravel road?
It's about $30,000 per kilometre.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to foreshadow a motion for option 6.
Yes, Madam Chair. Through General Manager to the Director, Steve. If we have 750,000 to spend on resheeting or $1 million to spend on resheeting, how much of this can we actually achieve? Do we have the resources to spend $1 million on the resheeting? If not, then shouldn't we be leaving that until next year and using some of this money elsewhere? Is that possible? Yeah.
Madam Mayor, the council has in the past probably expended $700,000 to $800,000 per year on gravel resheeting, but we haven't done that for the last 3 years. We're very experienced at that gravel resheeting, and we're confident that we will get during that 12-month period to gravel resheet either the full amount or whatever the partial amount is. Because if you did all of the gravel resheeting as proposed by Councillor Furry, we would do about 34 kilometres. And if we do, the 600,000, we would do about sort of 20 kilometres. But I just sort of estimated for the last 3 years, this is the third year where we haven't had any gravel resheeting. We're about between 70 and 80 kilometres short of what we would have done, in that time. So it's I think we're looking at some of the challenges in that area, but I'm confident that we can achieve that whatever amount is allocated.
This wouldn't be affected by the El Nino and all of that wet weather, would it? Or would it? What I'm getting at is, if we allocate the $1 million, will we actually spend it on? Or is it possible that because of bad weather, we may not be able to do that?
Well, we always allow that there will be a certain number of days per annum where we won't be able to grade because of the weather. And really, we can't, gravel resheet or grade when the road is too wet.
Right.
But I can't predict what the weather pattern is going to be like during 2021. But we will, work, in order to get that done. We've been experienced, at that. We have the suppliers for the gravel.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to speak against the motion as it stands right now. Firstly, I'd like to say that I appreciate Deputy Mayor Clary's sentiment. I think we all share the concern for the roads. But one of the things that I did after the workshop is I asked our General Manager a question today because I was between the two posts. I was like, do we spend it all or do we, juggle just like any household does the competing needs? And I asked the question, is there any road that is unsafe to drive right now? And his response, if I can get Chris to assist me with this, was about, sometimes it's about driving to the conditions. And when you expect to drive 100 kilometres on a gravel road, are you really doing justice to the issue of safety? Because we have not done gravel resheeting on strategic roads for the last almost 3 years, we've relied on that funding that we got through the disaster recovery. We used that funding to do, but we didn't actually have any product to put on it. So if we could do all of the roads right this year, it just wouldn't be possible to get that kind of work done for a start. We already have 50 capital projects burdening our staff for the 2021 year. That's before we add any of this on top. I think it's important that we do what we're capable of and we do things that we get the most bang for our buck. We can do 24 kilometres of road this year, but the important part of it, if we spend the 730, but if the important part of this is that we reintroduce and we re-establish the program. That's what's come undone here. And we do it in a way that we do the drainage and we do put product on it, because it's not just the complaint that we haven't done a road. It's that when we do it, we haven't done it to a standard that is maintainable for a long time, because we haven't done the drainage culverts. So it stuffs up the road faster, and the community respond to that, and they want to know why we didn't put product on it. And if you drive down many of our country roads and see the sides, are 4 feet higher, then there's been no maintenance on the side of the roads, let alone the road itself. So I want to see us do a resheeting program that brings in product, that deals with those culverts, that does those 24 kilometres well each year, so that we can get back on top of the maintenance, not just smoothing the edges and hoping it'll be okay. We have to do it well. So we need that 730K. It's an important year for the Memorial Hall. If we're going to have a very large building in the middle of our town, a white elephant, which is what it is. I mean, you can't use it in summer. It's stinking hot. You can't cater in it properly. If we're going to do justice to our community groups to actually use that well, we have to spend some money. And I was quite conflicted earlier this week. I thought, we could spend all this on gravel resheeting, and then I thought, well, we'll never get on top of all these other projects. So I'm speaking against option 1 and in preference of option 6.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Mayor Abbey?
I'm speaking for the motion. The comment that was just made was do what we do well. They can't do it well if they don't have product, and they can't get product if they don't have money. What the director, as I understood it, and please correct me if I'm not getting it correctly, is that he said it's actually what they're capable of doing without actually having to get other people in and use lots of other contractors. Many of the other things we do, we have to use contractors for. So we actually have staff who are actually capable of delivering the gravel resheeting. So I'm speaking for it on the basis that we actually have it within our capability to actually deliver it.
If I may, I'd also like to add some commentary in terms of speaking for the motion. Rubbish roads and rates. I've had more, as many probably have, more calls about roads than ever on my term of council, as many have. I drive around those roads all the time. They are in terrible condition. The potholes that never existed before. It's the whole weather event has really caused an enormous amount of grief. The fact that we're 3 years behind, don't think the community hasn't noticed that. The resheeting is mentioned over and over again. I think we have a unique opportunity with this additional funding to catch up and fix it and leave it in a good space for the next council. Those other projects are all worthy projects, but there are potentially alternative funding for them. So I think a lot of the rural residents have called when they've seen this and said, we do pay an enormous amount of rate as rural residents. We don't get rubbish, and we do utilise some services, but this is more important to us. So I think there's a large user group that really just want to drive to work, just want to drive to the bus. There's the bus network that's also suffering. Those poor bus drivers out on those rural roads at the moment are experiencing quite significant damage to their buses, and they never complain, but I know they're really struggling with it. So I suppose I would also be supportive of the motion of spending the money, doing the job properly, doing it once, doing it well, and catching up on one of our critical items as council, which is roads.
I'd just like to support the motion to Councillor Furrier's move. I think the roads are, I drive them all the time, and the roads are terrible. Now, there's one out there near Gundaroo, the Berrabanglo Road, it's got this grey gutter across it. You've got to pull up to get across it. I think as soon as we get these fixed up.
Councillor McManus, then. Councillor Ross. Councillor McManus, sure.
I'd like to foreshadow on option 7. Which would allocate well over 850,000 to rural roads. That would allow us to replace the floor of the Memorial Hall and the air conditioning, 150,000. So it would be the 1.02 less the new floor, the new air conditioning. The other reason I do that is because 2021-2022 is the 100th anniversary of the floor. Right, Councillor Frost?
That's right. Well, okay.
The laying is foundation stone, and I just think to spend 150 on a new floor and air conditioning, this would be an appropriate time to do it. I too understand the problem with rural roads and the fact that we haven't done what we should have done for the last 2.5 years. But at the same time, there is a slight balancing act there with a fairly significant event, 100-year anniversary, 102-year anniversary after the First World War. And what I'm asking for is a slight compromise of 150 less than the 1.02. So you're still spending $860,000 on $850,000 on your rural roads. It just fixes a little problem we have with the border. So it would be an alternative. So it's option 7, which would be the new floor, the air conditioning, and the rest on rural roads for resheeting.
Thank you, Councillor Yass.
That would be foreshadowed. I think, Chris, is that right? Yeah. General Manager.
Yep. For the moment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, Councillor Administrator, I wondered a little about the floor, because although the floor is old and will need fixing in some time, other problem, the big problem in the morning is the energy which people will need going in there to use it and using it.
Can I just say, I don't think there was, the commercial kitchen wasn't in Councillor McManus's, it was just the air conditioning and the floor.
Just informing that I would have thought the priority was to ask the commercial kitchen before the floor. Yeah, but that's another motion. So I just go this one. I find this really frustrating. Ever since I came in here 2.5 years ago, I've been pushing for resheeting. We went right through a whole massive 8% for 4 years increase in rates, much of which was borne by rural ratepayers. And we did it, and we did it. And the idea was we were going to fix all of these roads, and that was the logic and the sense behind it. And as part of that, we were going to look very hard at the efficiency of this organisation, and there was going to be contributions to go and do that sort of stuff. And over time, I've tried and pushed and pushed and pushed for this. And for much of the time, the people that now are telling me that they want to take the money from the Memorial Hall, which hasn't seen a dollar spent on it in decades, and take the money from booking toilet block, or take the money from somewhere else, which only happens on every so often, because otherwise they would be fixed. If there was funds there ready to be able to be spent on those things, they would have been accessed. They're not accessed because they're not sexy. They don't get things up. And somehow we have mismanaged this council so much over the last 8 or 10 years that we've taken the money that was to go to fix the roads, and it's gone somewhere, right? And maybe you're on very good terms, but I've never seen a decent explanation of what it was spent on and why we stopped for 3 years ago to putting money into resheeting. We do that and we say, oh, well, we've got a lot of pressure now for resheeting. We'll take the money from over here that this other group haven't had for so long. So you're just going to give it worse for everyone. To my mind, every one of these options provides more than 50% of those available funds to go to resheeting. Right? And to be honest, whether you're on any of those roads, the difference between 20 and 30 kilometres of road resheeted, if it happens to be between your place and where you want to go to, yes, it's very important, but you're not, there's something like 600 odd kilometres to get through, and trying to put a little band-aid on it with a little bit of money.
Point of order.
Councillor Ferry.
Point of order, Madam Chair. The Councillor Frost has just referred to 600 kilometres of road. I believe the director referred to about 80 kilometres that needed to be done, and the amount rounded actually works out to be, if this motion were to pass, be 50% of that amount.
Chair, I wouldn't have thought a point of order should be raised simply to argue the point.
We will let the director clarify.
I think what we have is we do have approximately 600 kilometres of unsealed roads.
Yep.
And what I've indicated is that because we didn't have a resheeting program this is the third year, if we had the resheeting program between 700,000 and 800,000, we would have resheeted, between 70 and 80 kilometres at this stage. So that's, so we've got 600. So, we've got we can't seal everything, resheet, every kilometre of those 600 kilometres. But you've got to have a maintenance program to actually get those roads, into a routine. That's why I was just referring to the 80.
No, I understood where you referred to the 80. We have 600 kilometres of road. You need, in order to maintain that and maintain that properly, you need a long-term organised program. You do not need just to grab a little bit of money where you can get it from some other deserving cause and put it all into that because that happens to suit the politics at the time. That is the sort of lack of planning that we've got us into this mess in the first place. So please, councillors, take your enthusiasm and use it to develop a long-term program for these roads, not just going about it from what seems like an easy source.
Thank you. Does anyone want to speak to the motion or against? We need to vote on the current motion. Well, he'll be closing it if he does. How do we do the alternative, the foreshadowed motion?
No, we don't do the foreshadowed
We'll
motion.
deal with the motion first. Okay, Councillor Ferry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I will not mute my enthusiasm. I will not respond to that request. It is incredibly unfair. It's an insult to residents who actually live on those roads. Whoever made that generalisation, and I won't name names, but whoever decided to make the generalisation that basically no roads are unsafe, it's just basically the conditions need to be considered, need to go on those roads and drive them. They need to actually read the complaints that are coming through. They need to experience what residents are experiencing. The generalisation that residents are driving 100 kilometres an hour down a gravel road is simply unacceptable. It is an awful generalisation and it does an injustice to our rural residents in this community. So I will not accept that. Residents are angry. They have every right and every reason to be angry. I appreciate that the Memorial Hall, the timber in the Memorial Hall and the air conditioning needs to be done. But with all due respect, there have been multiple opportunities for grant funding here to be taken up. We also are supposed to be going and consulting with the users of the Memorial Hall on what actually needs to be done. And here we are, 9 councillors trying to determine what needs to be done ahead of that. So where I want to close, Madam Chair, is that councillors need to consider very carefully to what extent we take these complaints seriously, to what extent we acknowledge that we have been ignoring resheeting for basically 3 years and that we have some significant catching up to do. We have an opportunity to catch up on 50% of what has not been done over that 3-year period. We need to take that opportunity with both hands. I feel like we are doing an absolute injustice to our community if we're not maximising every opportunity to get this resheeting program sorted. So I will not mute my enthusiasm and I will ask councillors to strongly take a good look at themselves when deciding where to go on this recommendation.
Okay, so we need to put the current recommendation to the vote before we look at the foreshadowed motions. So all those in favour of the current recommendation?
Aye.
Aye.
That is Abbey, Ferry, Reid, Burgess and Harker. All those against? That is Frost, Jones, McManus. So the motion is carried, am I correct?
Yes.
Turner? Yeah. McManus, Turner, together, Jones and Frost against? So the motion is carried. Okay, so the motion is carried, which means we don't deal with the foreshadowed motions. Thank you, everyone. I think that's a very hard decision to have been made. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 8, Director of Corporate and Community Reports. So the first quarter budget review, 2019-2020. If I may, if I'm able to as chair, I actually had an additional recommendation into this. And the additional recommendation was that we investigate the reporting of a quarterly budget versus quarterly actuals. So this is not something we currently do now. And the reason that I wanted to include this, or see if the staff can include it, we've previously spoken to Mark and the staff, and there is an education in terms of doing this, but what hopefully will highlight is that any discrepancy, a large discrepancy, is immediately noticeable and can be reported on or commented on straight away, such as one of the items we have. So I was hoping to include that in this recommendation.
I'll move that.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mayor Abbey, Deputy Mayor Ferry. Would anyone like to, Councillor McManus?
I'd just like to make an amendment. I noticed that there was a fairly significant difference in the labour component of the report, and I'd just like a further report brought back to possibly the December meeting, just that fully explains the difference in labour costings, because it appears that we're up $2 million, but all of us know that actually staff numbers, because of COVID and everything else, are down. There's still quite a few positions that haven't been filled, no matter how hard we've tried to recruit. I think there's a paper explanation for that, which we all need to get our head around. So I'm asking for an additional report on the staffing, on the labour costing component of the report.
Are the mover and seconder happy to include that item?
I'm happy for that to be included.
Thanks, Ray.
Also happy, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone like to speak for or against this item recommendation? Councillor Turner, Jones, Foster, okay? Read. Okay. Did you, as Councillor Abbey, did you want to close?
No, I think it speaks to itself, and I think the additional reports will just add to our knowledge, which will never hurt.
Okay, thank you. So let's vote on the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, everyone. We'll move to item 8.2, the investment and borrowing report. Would someone like to move and second the recommendation, please? Councillor Turner, Councillor Reid. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak for or against the recommendation? I'll take that as a no. Okay, let's, those in favour?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Thank you, those on Zoom. Okay, motion is carried. Okay, moving to the General Manager's report. So the John Lewis is not confidential. We'll move to item 9.1, John Lewis William request.
So moved.
Mayor Abbey would
Second.
a lot of hands there. Councillor McManus, would anyone like to speak to this motion?
I just wanted to say I think we've done a good investigation, a healthy investigation, and come up with a good recommendation for a generous donation from a resident of the Yass Valley to the young people of the Yass Valley. So I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'd just like to add my thanks to the staff for implementing the motion that we put last month and ensuring that we had all the information that we really need to ensure that this money is properly spent. Thank you, staff, for doing a great job of organising the information that was requested from that motion.
Yeah, echo that. Well done. Okay, so let's put the anyone else like to speak to the motion? Okay. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Councillor Jones? Abstain. Okay. So Councillor Jones is abstaining. And motion is carried. Okay, the next three items need to go into confidential. Item 9.2, 9.3 and 9.4, correct?
So moved.
So we need a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ferry. I need a seconder, please, for moving those three items into confidential. Thank you, Councillor Reid. So we will deal with those three in the confidential section. There is no item 10, notice of motion, and no questions without notice, item 11. So we'll move to the minutes and recommendation of council committees. Does anyone have any items they'd like to speak to, or we can move them as a group? Did anyone have any of those items that they did want to actually speak to?
Happy.
No, we've moved those now onto the minutes and recommendation of council. All those are moved to confidential, and we'll deal with those in the also section 12.
Yeah, 12.1 is to go.
Oh, sorry, you're correct. So sorry, we do need to move 12.1 into confidential. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Turner, you happy to move that? Sorry, good pick up. So the item 12.2, 12.3, 12.4, 12.5. Councillor Ferry?
So moved.
You're happy to move those 1, 2, 3, 4 items?
That's
can I have a
correct.
seconder for the minutes, those 4 sets of minutes, please? Councillor Reid, thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Okay. Okay, thank you, Dave. And item 12.1 is in confidential. So now we are in confidential. We need to move into confidential. Can someone please move us into confidential? Thank you, Councillor Jones, Councillor Frost. Thank you for fast hands. We'll stop the recording.